Hey guys, I'm going to be doing something a little different here today. I'm going to be testing out a water-based wiping stain and a water-based clear finish from Sherwin-Williams. It is from their commercial industrial line, the Sherwood series, and the wiping stain is an S64W series. It's the water reducible wiping stain. And then the finish itself is actually the Sherwood Chem Aqua Plus water reducible clear finish in a medium rub defect, which is about a 35-40 degree, which is equivalent to kind of like a higher gloss satin. So anyways, I've had some experience in the past with water-based wiping stains. I used them in the shop here about 10 years ago. I kind of ventured out, did it for about a year, and it was pretty good stuff. And from my last employer back in the mid-90s, we did a water-based for about a year. And there, I'd say from the mid-90s to about early 2000, 5 years later, there was a significant difference just in the quality of the wiping stains as far as grain raise. So I've never used the Sherwin-Williams water reducible wiping stain or finish before, so this will be kind of interesting to see how well it performs. I've been told by the service reps that these definitely perform much like their solvent-borne companions, so we're going to give it a shot. I did look at the wiping stain color. It's a custom color, I think, from someone else, but they don't stock any, so they just whipped one up for me. It's kind of like a medium, kind of like a walnut type brown. So and I will say this, I did play around with the wiping stain real briefly. I just slopped it on a piece of plywood that I had sanded with some 150 grit aluminum oxide on an orbital sander, and I was absolutely impressed. I did it on a piece of oak, a piece of maple, and a piece of birch, and not one of them had any grain raise whatsoever, just with 150 grit. And when I opened this can of wipe stain up, it had been sitting for a few days before I picked it up, and I just stirred it up and I literally didn't find anything on the bottom. It was pretty much a solid color all the way through. So evidently the tints used for a water base are much more different. I've told they're not a dye, but they're somewhere between a dye and an actual pigment. So we'll see just exactly how well it performs. So as far as this Chem Aqua Plus, I've never tried it. The actual Chem Aqua Plus is new within the last few years. I have this Sherwin-Williams book that dates back to 2000-2001, and I was browsing in here and I did see that there was the Sherwood Chem Aqua lacquer, which supposedly the Chem Aqua Plus is supposedly one step above. This, I was told, compares to much like a just a regular pre-catalyzed lacquer, and that the Chem Aqua Plus is much like a post-catalyzed conversion varnish, maybe a little bit below that, but it's definitely better than the pre-cat. So back in 2000, they've already had the Chem Aqua, and as far as the wiping stain goes, well, here we go. The S64 series Sherwood water reducible wiping stain has been around since 2000 as well. So we'll see exactly what we get here. So I'm going to be staining this sample door set that I made about 6 months ago with the intentions of maybe doing some glazing techniques on it, but the more I realized this sample door set or style really wasn't going to fit any of the characteristics in the area that I'm in. So I decided what better than to use it for doing some testing. So I'm going to be testing this water-based wiping stain and clear finish on it, and see how it turns out. So alright, I'm going to set up a gravity feed spray gun with the wiping stain first. I will spray the face frame, the edges, the inside edges and the face, wipe it down. Then we'll spray the back of the door along with the edges, wipe it down, and the same thing for the drawer front, and then we'll repeat the process for the door and drawer front on the front. We'll let that dry for at least an hour, and then we'll do the one coat of the Chem Aqua Plus clear finish as a seal coat, let that dry, scuff it, and then spray a second coat and see what we get. Doesn't look that great, but from what I've learned is as this dries out, it dries pretty even in color. So I'm just gonna let it be and see what this turns out to be. That actually looks pretty nasty, but from what I've been told, this will actually look to be pretty nice once it's dry. So we'll see. Now we wait. Hey, I just wanted to point out here as far as what the back of the door looks like now. As you can see, it actually looks pretty even. If you look right down here by my fingers, you can actually see it's a little bit dark there yet, and that's actually where the stain's still kind of wet yet down in the groove. So surprisingly enough, as I said before, you know, it kind of looked kind of horrible when he sprayed the stain on and wiped it. It was really uneven and looked really tore up and blotchy. But it's actually really uniform. That is the beauty of a water-based wipe stain. It typically will stain up much more evenly on a dense wood than a standard solvent or oil-based wipe stain would. Now, I mentioned about grain raise a little bit earlier, and when I did the initial testing, just to see what the color was that I had gotten, I had tried out the stain on 3 separate pieces of plywood just like this. I got a whole stack of these. And I tried it on birch. I tried it on oak. Let me try that again. I tried it on maple. I tried it on birch. And I tried it on oak. Now, as you can see, it's just a standard 1/4 inch plywood. There's several layers in this one actually, but it's still about a 32nd inch thick layer of veneer on the surface. Now, out of all of these, the birch had the most grain raise, but it wasn't bad. It was very, very minimal. So what I've discovered is, once again, the veneer panel, a little bit of grain raise, very, very mild. The solid stock, on the other hand, this has some roughness to it. It's not bad, but it's probably twice as bad as what this is. So there's a way to combat that. So the way to kind of combat that is pretty much, it's a really simple solution. It's a solution that I call a pre-grain raised seal coat. And basically what it is, it's very, very much like a wash coat. It's identical to a wash coat, but serving a different purpose. When you do a wash coat, for example, with a solvent-based system, the idea of the wash coat typically is to kind of fill in the pores to a certain extent, but more so you're doing it to create an even surface, so that way your wiping stain will bite in evenly across the entire surface on like a denser wood like maple, for example. With the pre-grain raised seal coat, basically you're doing the same thing, but you're also raising the grain. That's why I call it a pre-grain raised seal coat. Because what you do is you can take your water-based clear finish and you can reduce that, or just take one part of that, like just a few ounces or however much you need. One part of your clear water reducible finish, anywhere from 5 parts to 20 parts of water. And what you do is you create this solution and you put it in your spray gun, you spray out a nice even wet coat, much like you're going to spray a finish, but you won't be able to get it that wet because you'll evaporate much like a spray stain. So anyways, you spray that on and you let it dry. Now the one thing you can also do to help yourself with this is that when you do your final finish sanding, and if you know you're going to do this pre-grain raise seal coat, you can stop your finish sanding grit one grit prior to your final grit. So for example, if I was to do this over again, which I probably will, I would stop at 180 grit first because my finishing grit for water is 220. So I'd spray, sand everything with 180. I'd make a solution probably of at least 10 to 1 ratio, 10 parts water, 1 part of the clear finish. Spray out a nice even wet coat to the point where it just doesn't puddle on the surface. Let that dry, make sure it's good and dry. Then you can come back and do your final finish sanding with your 220. And what happens is that when you spray on that solution, because it's mostly water, you raise the grain pretty heavily. And what will happen is because you have the finish in there, you got a little bit of resin or you got a little bit of body to it. What it'll do is it'll surround the grain around the pores and it'll hold the grain up, so it'll lock it in place. When you come back with your sandpaper and your final finish sanding, you actually cut the fibers off. Now your grain raising is pretty much done because your fibers have already been raised, they've been locked in place, and they've been cut off. So now when you go put on your water-based wiping stain, you should have none to very, very minimal grain raise after that. So it's a little trick I've learned in the past, and I didn't want to do it on this project just because I wanted to see how well it performs straight out of the pail. But I'll do a video probably later on to actually demonstrate that same process and see how well it works. Now the disadvantage to doing this pre-grain raised seal coat, much like a wash coat, is that because that you have a little bit of finish in that film that you spray on the door in the whitewood stage, your stain is not going to bite in as quite as much, so it won't be as deep or rich. So you need to adjust your stain accordingly. So whatever you find your magic ratio to be, you need to make sure that your manufacturer, your supplier, wherever you're getting your stain from, or if you're going to adjust it yourself, that you need to compensate for that pre-grain raised seal coat. I'm not sure what I was thinking when I came up with this door style. It's a pain in my ass to wipe. Once again, looks like shit, but this will dry to look something like this. once again, that looks like shit. But should dry out to look something like this. It's what I remember from any other water base. It's got a kind of a bluish, milky hue to it that should dry crystal clear. Now, the one thing I'm noticing is this gravity feed gun that I'm using is probably not the best. I don't see any foaming or anything like that, which you can run a risk possibly with air spray. But if I really want this to the ultimate test, I'd probably have to run this through my Kremlin air-assisted airless. But for this sample, I just wanted to see how well it looks. We'll let this dry. I'll spray the back of the door and drawer front and let them dry and sand them up and spray them again. I just wanted to show you this milky blue appearance, which is perfectly normal. my opinion, this looks like shit. I think it's going to turn out to be pretty much a pretty good looking product when it's all said and done. We'll see. Okay, that first seal coat went pretty well. It didn't quite spray out the way I thought it would, but it is a little on the thicker side, and it is a little on the cooler side right now too. I didn't want to turn the heat on for this one test, but being it's getting later in the day, I might have to because it's starting to cool off a little bit here. But anyways, we'll see what happens when that dries, and I will flip the door and drawer front over and spray the face side just like I did the back. And then once that's all said and done, I will, once the front's completely dry as well, excuse me, I will start sanding everything and then start spraying the final top coat on the front of the face frame, the backs of the door and drawer front, and then following up by the front of the door and drawer front. And then we'll have the finished product, and then we'll have to do some evaluation. So until then, gotta let it dry. As you can see, this doesn't look very attractive, but this bluish color will actually disappear as the coating dries. It'll be clear by the time I'm ready to sand it, but I'm going to let this sit overnight and we'll take off with this again tomorrow. But yeah, this is what Waterborne is going to look like when you spray it out. Now, every manufacturer is a little bit different as far as you know, the color of their coating, but most of them that I've tested have this bluish white milky look to it, and then as it dries it'll be crystal clear. So we'll see what this looks like when it turns out. Okay, the sealer is dry on both sides, and now we're going to scuff the seal coat and then apply a coat of the Waterborne Chem Aqua finish on the back side of the door and drawer front. And then once that's dry in about an hour or two, then I'll spray the front side, and it'll be a finished project, and we'll go over the results. Alright, let's get to the scuff sanding. Okay, I got a couple different pieces of sanding media here. One is this purple sponge from 3M. It's a they call it a pro grade, and this is I believe it's an extra fine. Yep, extra fine pro grade. Anyways, this is equivalent to about a 280, 320, somewhere around there. And I used to use these quite a bit when I was using just a regular pre-cat sealer and lacquer. But what I was finding was that these are pretty doggone expensive, and they just didn't last for what I was paying for it. So then I had gotten a lead on some of these sanding sponges. I want to say it was maybe from Charles Neal from In the Wood Shop on YouTube. Anyways, these are called Indasa Rhino Soft. They're manufactured by a company called Indasa. You can get them at abrasives.com. And anyways, these work really well with the fast dry vinyl sealer to use, or the pre-cat fast dry vinyl sealer. So hopefully they'll work, you know, for this Waterborne self-sealing clear top coat as well. But if not, you know, maybe this will work. So we'll see. I did a little bit of testing here off camera, and they both seem to, you know, work pretty well. But believe it or not, this actually 3M one actually works a little bit better. So I'm going to give this one a shot on a couple spots, and then try this one. This one I'll for surely have to use on the edges so I don't burn through the clear coat into the stain. So the first thing I notice is that this first coat of this Chem Aqua Waterborne or water reducible clear finish definitely seems to powder out pretty well. It slicks up, so for a self-sealing product it doesn't work too bad. Now they do make a sealer that can go with this, but it is suitable for a self-seal product as well. I don't know how well you can see that, but you know, it is turning kind of white. Not as white as a typical sealer would, but then again, this can be used as a self-sealed product. One thing I've noticed is that this is actually filling this block up quite a bit, so I'm not so sure if this block is going to be the right answer or if that is one of the side effects of this product being used as self-seal. The pre-catalyzed lacquer I use currently right now, that is also suitable for self-sealing, and I used to do that for well, probably 5-6 years. And then I decided to add the fast dry catalyzed vinyl sealer under that, just as added protection for moisture and stuff like that. But when I was using the self-seal pre-cat, or the pre-catalyzed lacquer as a self-seal, I never noticed it actually filling up the block this much. So I'm assuming the difference is the chemistry in the resins. Now for the front, let's try the sponge here. Not bad. Still not perfect. Now for the detail work. Okay, I remember from the days I've tried Waterborne in the past, these synthetic woven sponges, generically known as Scotch-Brite, but there's other manufacturers. Scotch-Brite is actually a 3M brand or a 3M trade name, but I believe this is also made by Indasa. But anyways, if I remember right, this worked pretty well for profiles and stuff. So I had an edge here that I actually burned through a little bit, which I was really surprised. So I know a lot of the new Waterbornes nowadays are a little bit more durable and a little harder, so I was really surprised to see that happen. Okay, now that I got everything sanded, I'm going to spray the backs of the door and drawer front, and then I'll spray the edges and the front of the face frame. And once that's all dry, about an hour or two, I will come back and make sure there's no overspray on the front side of the door and drawer front. If there is, I'll just take a sponge and lightly buff it out, and then I will spray the front of the door and drawer front, and that'll be it. And then we'll go through a review. All right. Okay, I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see this, but there is some real fine chunks along the screen here. Of course, it's not going to show up very well on the camera, but there was very, very minor debris. It's mostly caught in the cone at the bottom there. But rule of thumb is anytime you spray out of a cup gun, it'd be really best to run it through a cone strainer like this here first. This is just a cheap paper cone strainer I picked up at a local hardware store. They run about, I think I paid like 20 cents or 18 cents or something like that. And if you go online, you can get these at some finish supplier as well, or a finishing equipment supplier, or finishing material supplier. Get them online. I've seen them already. I think like a sleeve of like 100 for about 10 bucks, about $10, or I'm sorry, 10 cents a cone, which is pretty inexpensive. So, anyways. That is the final top coat. Sure hope it looks better than this when it's done. And this is the final top coat. So we'll see what this looks like when it dries. It for surely, like I said many times before, it doesn't look very attractive, but we'll see what this dries up to look like. The backs look really good, so we'll have to just wait and see. So there it is, the finished product. It is very smooth, feels much like a lacquer. It's a pretty nice uniform color. There's a little color variation from here to here, but that is part of the actual wood color. But overall, it has a pretty decent appearance. Look at the back side of the door. A little bit more burl here, but that's just part of the veneer. Kind of wish now I would have made that the front. And then just a piece of natural finished in the inside. So there we have it. A sample front finished with the Sherwood Water Reducible S64 series wiping stain and 2 coats of the Sherwood Chem Aqua Plus Water Reducible clear finish. I have to say, I am impressed with the way this feels and how well it actually applied. Hey guys, I just want to talk real briefly as far as my history and experience with water-based stains and finishes. It all started for me back in the mid-1990s. I was working for my last employer, and we had ventured into the waterborne stains and finishes. We'd used the Waterborne stain system from one manufacturer and then a water-based sealer and top coat from the same manufacturer we had currently been buying our solvent-based stains and finishes from. And anyways, the first thing we noticed right away was the grain raise. It was absolutely horrible. You could finish sand with 220 grit and spray on a full wet coat of this wipe stain, go and start wiping it. Immediately you could just feel the grains start to fuzz up. Not the fact that that was the only problem, but the other problem was that it seemed to dry very quickly. When you think about water, water doesn't evaporate that fast, not compared to some of your faster solvents like BM&P, naphtha, xylene, even mineral spirits to that fact. But it would dry very rapidly. I would say you had probably about a minute to 2 minute window of wiping. After that, it would lock down very quickly to the point where you couldn't even wipe it. Once that happened, basically you'd have to take some solvent like lacquer thinner or acetone, wipe down the entire surface, re-sand it, and then re-stain it again, hoping that you're going to get the color right this time. The sealer and top coat that we used was a waterborne finish. As I mentioned, it was from the previous manufacturer we've been working with from all of our solvent-borne finishes. And the sealer was kind of a pink color in hue, and the top coat was kind of a bluish color, much like the Chem Aqua we just saw. And you'd spray on a nice full wet coat of the sealer. We were using an airless gun. It was just a silver plus Graco, and then the pump was a 15-to-1 stainless steel President pump. Probably about 1,300 pounds of pressure with probably a 615 tip. I just want to say 15 thousandths. Anyways, spray it out a nice full wet coat, about 2.5 to 3 mils wet. Had kind of that pink hue to it. It would dry down to kind of a cloudy look. We'd sand it up and spray a coat of the waterborne top coat over that, which was, like I said, kind of had a blue hue to it. About same thing, a Graco silver plus airless gun with a President or Graco President 15-to-1 ratio airless pump. And I'd say tip size again probably a 615 and about 1,300 pounds fluid pressure. Anyways, spray that out about 2.5 to 3 mils wet. That also had that blue milky look to it, and never really dried crystal clear. And then when everything was all said and done, it kind of had a plastic look to it, so it didn't really have a nice lacquer look to it. So 5 years later, I decided to try it in my shop with the experience I had had with working with my previous employer, and I tried a different manufacturer. And the wiping stain was definitely better. It wiped a lot easier. It wiped much like a solvent-borne wiping stain. And even if it did start to dry a little bit too quick, you could take some stain on a rag and re-wet it and blend it out. The only disadvantage was it had a tendency of going a little bit darker when you did that, but you kind of learned to work with it. Grain raise was a real minimal. There was a little bit there, but not much. And then the the clear sanding sealer and finish I used over that was also by the same manufacturer, and the sealer and top coat were formulated in different viscosities. You can get a real thick viscosity for airless application, or a thinner viscosity for airless spray, or for air assisted airless, or HVOP compliant, or even air spray. So I had used the thick viscosity because I was applying by airless, and it was kind of a white hue to it, and it would dry crystal clear. Do a nice good sanding job on it, and then spray out a coat of the clear finish, and there again it went on milky, but it came out nice and clear. So it was overall a good performing product. Now, what stopped me from using it was probably the biggest thing in my mind was the cost of having a custom color match done. The manufacturer, who was actually in state, had actually did the color matches for me, because they worked by direct sales versus actually going through distributorship. And they had called me one day and said that we need to charge you more for the color matches because our lab technicians are spending way too much time and we're not getting paid for it. And I was thinking that they're just going to do a flat fee, and they did. They did a flat fee per hour rather than just a flat fee. Anywhere else I've ever had a color matches done, it's been one flat fee, and it may be that one job they made a lot of money, the next job they didn't make any money, but it was always a flat fee. I've paid a flat fee up front, I think of like $50, and then whatever the stain cost was. So there was basically a $50 development charge, and then whatever the material cost was. With these guys that I was dealing with, they wanted, I think, $25 an hour. And there was one stain color they did for me. It took them 4 hours, and then the stain itself cost about $40. So I had $140 for 1 gallon of stain. And that was back in 2000. Can't imagine what it'd be like today. That was pretty much the line in the sand for me, that I just couldn't do that. I need to go back to some place where they would do it for a flat fee. I wouldn't get hit with some sudden surprise. So what I will say about that coating manufacturer, though, is their coatings were very, very durable. Long story short, I had finished a couple of desks that a friend of mine had made in his shop, and he brought them down to me. I finished them on a weekend, came back and picked them up maybe like that following Monday, Tuesday, and about a week later he had called me and he says, got a little bit of a problem. My son decided to take a Sharpie marker and started scribbling all over one of the sides of the cabinets. First thing that went through my mind was, I was thinking, he's going to have to bring the cabinet back down, we're going to have to strip it and refinish it. But before I said anything, I said, let me call the manufacturer and speak to somebody in the lab and see what they have to say about it. So I called the manufacturer, spoke to one of the lab technicians, and they immediately right away said, oh, that's not a problem. First of all, what coating were you using and how long has it been dry? Told them what I was using. They said, not a problem. Go ahead and take some 409 household cleaner or some acetone and wipe off the affected area to get rid of the marker. And I said, we're talking about water here. She's like, yeah, not a problem. She goes, it's formulated to withstand that. And I thought, well, they would know if anything. In the back of my mind, I had a lot of doubts that this was going to work. So I called my friend back up and I said, you're not going to believe this, but they're telling me that you can use 409 or acetone because of the amount of time it's had to dry, it shouldn't affect the film. But I said, go ahead, try it. I said, if it doesn't work, I said, we'll figure something out. I said, I'll make it right for you. I said, we'll get this taken care of for you. So anyways, about 10 minutes went by, he called me back and he said, you're not going to believe this. And I said to him, I said, well, I'm pretty sure I am. I said, you're going to tell me that it took the finish right off and went down to the stain. He says, no. He said, it took the marker off, but it never touched the finish. And I said, you mean it's not gummy, it's not soft, he said, it's not dull or high in gloss? He's like, no. He said, you never even knew it was there. So, I believe him, obviously, but I had tried it here in my shop, did the exact same thing, sprayed out a piece with that stain color and that whole finishing process, let it sit for a week, took an ordinary Sharpie marker and just scribbled on a couple spots, and took some regular acetone on a rag, and I literally had wiped the marker right off, and that finish was untouched. So I was really impressed. But then again, the line in the sand for me was the cost of the color matches. So therefore, then I moved back into the solvent again. And Now, from what I'm seeing with the Sherwin-Williams stuff, the Sherwood S64 water reducible wiping stain and the Sherwood Chem Aqua Plus water reducible clear finish, I definitely think that this is something that I can look at in the future and possibly switch to. It'll take some adjustment again because it's been a while since I've been into the Waterborne, but I definitely think it's something that can happen. So anyways, I just wanted to share with you that water is not all that bad. If you're willing to adapt to it, you can make it work. So anyways, I want to thank you for watching this lengthy video. I apologize for it being a little on the long side, but hopefully you have gotten some good information about it, and when the time comes, hopefully you're not too afraid to venture into the waterborne finish. Thanks for watching. Questions and comments are welcome. Thank you.